Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Choose Inclusion. I'm here with my wonderful co-hosts, as usual, UB and Mike. How are you guys doing?
Pretty good. Hi, Mike.
Hello, hello, guys. It's fairly chilly here in the Denver metro area, but I'm
It's
thinking we're going to
awesome.
warm up with our amazing guest today.
Yeah, absolutely. We have Z Clark joining us. Z is a future author. She just got an agent, which is amazing. She's also the founder of Reclaiming Flow, a mindfulness and breathwork teacher and a tech executive, having done a lot of work in Silicon Valley in the tech space for quite some time. So we're super excited to have you here. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things around. I don't know. There's just a lot of things we're going to talk about today. So Z, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you today.
And Z, that's your superhero name, right?
Z is my superhero name. That is very true.
So Z, the
I
first question we always ask our guests because it's really important for everyone to just kind of be honest with where they're at, and it's always good for our listeners to kind of hear where our guests are at. Is how are you? How are you doing?
I am doing really, really well today. I am also a little bit chilly because I have tropical blood. But I'm doing really well because of my mindfulness practice because I woke up this morning and I meditated and I wrote my morning pages. So I'm feeling great.
Awesome. That's great to hear. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. Like, can you tell us a little bit about your background and kind of where you came from and how that led to the work that you're doing today?
Definitely. I grew up in Washington, D.C. I am the child of immigrants. My mother is from the Philippines, and my father is from Panama. However, I am, well, Blasian, Afro Latina. I'm a whole lot of different cultures. My father's family is actually Jamaican, and Jamaicans moved to Panama to build the Panama Canal. So I grew up in DC in the 90s, which is the period where DC was known as the murder capital of America, where crack was everywhere. We re-elected Mayor Marion Barry after he was caught smoking crack on camera. So, I mean, I remember my first drive-by shooting, I was 7 years old, and my last drive-by shooting, I was 17. That was the year that I left Washington, D.C. And while I lived in a pretty rough neighborhood, I was very fortunate enough to get scholarships to go to private schools. So I remember being 8 years old on the first day of school, and looking back now, I can say, oh, that was imposter syndrome. But really, I just looked around and was the only Black person, the only poor person. And I was like, what am I doing here? Do I belong here? So that was DC, going, living in a Black neighborhood, going to a predominantly white school, and having very early memories of racism. Like when I was in high school, I remember being with a couple Black classmates in our green plaid uniforms, having lunch at a mall, and getting kicked out by the security guards because they made up a rule that said that minors weren't allowed to be in the mall without adult supervision, right? And then our parents were like, "That's racism," and I was like, "That was racism." So yeah, that was my growing up period. I went to Harvard for undergrad. I'm a violinist, and so that decision was big because I got into Juilliard, and I was debating whether I wanted to be a musician or whether I wanted to do something else. And having grown up poor, I made the very practical, responsible decision. So I went to Harvard undergrad, studied economics. I went back to Harvard for business school. And then after that, I spent a decade in Silicon Valley working in the tech industry, often being the only Black person, sometimes the only woman, because tech is very male dominated, and almost always the only Black woman in the room. Lots of microaggressions at work, and just lots of challenges being Black. You don't get promoted as quickly as others. You watch these young tech bros just rise up the ranks super quickly. And eventually I just had enough. So I went to India. I did my Black girl version of Eat, Pray, Love. I meditated. I learned breath work. I got my yoga teacher certification. And then when I came back to the States, I realized that I could use all of these techniques I learned to help me deal with the challenges of being Black in the workplace. So dealing with microaggressions, translating all of those ancient teachings into some of the challenges that I was facing at work. And that's kind of why I founded Reclaiming Flow, which is mindfulness training, particularly focused on the challenges that Black women, Black people, people of color face in the workplace.
See, I was wondering if you could tell us, I mean, there's so much to unpack in all of this, and I'm sure Mike and Yubi are going to have their own set of questions, but I'll just go ahead and jump in with mine. Can you tell us about your experiences working in Silicon Valley in the tech space?
Yeah, I mean, it is a very challenging environment. It's very fast paced. People are moving at the speed of lightning. It's like growth, 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 growth. And it's really hard to be a Black person in that world. I remember, the first day of a job, a boss came to me and said, "Hey, I just want you to know I didn't hire you because you're Black." I was like, I went to Harvard twice. I never thought that you hired me because I was Black. Look at my resume. And on a last day of a job, I had the CMO of a company say to me, "How does it feel to know that the only thing people are talking about is that a Black woman just quit?" And I'm like, how about the millions of dollars that I brought this company? How about that? So, very challenging. Even just getting a promotion, I have to fight for that. I remember a situation where I was running sales, and I went to my CEO and I was like, "Look, I'm not getting meetings with these C-level executives because my title is too junior." They're like, "Let me talk to your boss." And I was like, "Do you want to take these meetings? I know that you don't have time. So either promote me or lose business because of, this glass ceiling, basically." And then you know what he told me? He said, "You're right. You deserve a promotion. You're doing a great job. And I want these meetings and I don't have time to do them. So why don't you change your title on LinkedIn and reprint business cards? But I'm really sorry, I can't change your title in the HR system because we're doing an assessment of levels." And so for like a year, I was living a lie. I had a fake title. I wasn't getting paid what I deserved to be paid. And yet I see my white colleagues get promoted so quickly, especially the young tech bros. That's what it was like.
I mean, isn't that just, and we've heard this so many times, and it's really hilarious to me because, one thing you said was that you brought them millions of dollars. And we've heard that countless times about literally the millions upon millions of dollars that are lost because, and yet money drives most people, right? Like at the end of the day, it comes down to power and money. And so it's so hilarious that they can't see past their own privilege, racism, supremacy, whatever you want to call it. It's like not even the money can break them out of that mindset. And it's insane to me. Because that's exactly right. If you strip it all away, they're losing millions of dollars just because of their behavior. It's crazy to me.
Yep, it's so true that the biases are so strong, and there have been a lot of studies that show that, like, for example, 69% of Black women professionals felt that they had to work harder to progress compared to 16% of white women, right? We constantly have to prove ourselves. A study by Lean In and McKinsey showed that 40% of Black women need to provide more evidence of their competence compared to 14% of white men, right? And there's so few of us in leadership positions. It's like the structure is set up that even though we add so much financial value, to your point, this is generations and generations of bias.
Z, I'm kind of speechless because of the experiences. I still get floored, even with all of our guests kind of sharing, their history. Like I still get kind of floored with it, and I know I'm white, but I'm also blind, so I sometimes I just don't see it. I physically don't see it, right? So it still baffles me. But I love kind of again the call it lemons in the lemonade, but it's more than that. Like it's your attitude of like you're a change agent. I think you were raised as a change agent based on our pre-call stuff. Like you just, this is kind of part of your nature. And so you took, all of this history and you created some amazing training. And I'd love to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I teach mindfulness training, particularly to Black people and people of color in the workplace, and it actually started. So I went to India. I studied all of these tools and techniques. Right. I'm even a Reiki practitioner. I'm a sound healer with Tibetan singing bowls. I'm a Reiki practitioner. I teach meditation. I teach breath work, and so I started teaching these classes to the broader community, and realized that the only people coming to my classes were wealthy white women. And I love all people, and I believe that everyone needs to be healed. But what I really realized is that Black people and people of color need it most. And particularly with my experiences in the workplace, I realized that there weren't resources for people like me. As I looked at the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, both at the companies I've worked at and where all of my friends work, I really felt that they were for white people. Everybody's focused on implicit bias, which is great. And I am all for that, except that we as Black people cannot wait for our white colleagues to be less racist, right? Like, otherwise, it actually has a negative impact on our health. Black people have higher rates of high blood pressure, and recent studies show that discrimination actually causes this high blood pressure. So, right, it is very challenging for us. And then there are these talent acquisition programs and initiatives, right, which is also awesome. I am all for that as well. But what about the Black people and people of color that are at these companies today? What are these DEI initiatives doing for them? And that is where my training comes in. So I teach a class called Mindfulness to Heal from Microaggressions at Work. When somebody calls you the wrong name, they call you the name of the other Black person, or when someone says, wow, you're really articulate, you're not like the others, or if somebody says, are you sure your work is right? And then they're looking for some other white person's validation of the work that you did. And when we experience these microaggressions in the workplace, it causes just constant level of stress. Like we're constantly on guard. And so I teach tools and techniques, especially breathing techniques, that are really, really helpful for us when we deal with these things so that we don't lose our sanity. Like I'll give you an example. The belly breath. Okay, this is the simplest breathing technique possible, which is you literally just as you inhale, you feel your belly expand like a balloon to its full capacity, which, as women, we're like always trying to look skinny. Is not about that, because that actually, this breathing technique actually stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. So if the sympathetic nervous system is that fight or flight, this is the opposite. This is of rest and restoration. And if you do just a simple belly breath, when someone says something to you that triggers you in the moment, it can have huge impacts on your health, on your psyche. And then you're not reacting from a place of like anger. Like I can't tell you how many times I really physically wanted to do stuff to people after they said something, and I needed to calm myself in the moment. So I teach a class on microaggressions. I teach a class on countering imposter syndrome with courage. I teach a class on bringing my whole self to work, but for Black people and for people of color, because I've had so many authentic leadership classes taught by white people, and they're like, be your full self. And I'm like, okay, except I had to straighten my hair because I was told that if I didn't, I wasn't professional. I have to change the way I speak. And also I have to hide that I grew up really poor because I'm just trying to fit in here. And for me, code switching is essential for my survival. Can you tell me about that white person teaching me about authentic leadership? And so I bring a lens of what it's like as a Black person and a person of color at work. And I combine those challenges with some of these techniques, breathing, meditation, affirmations, things that have been done for thousands of years. And I link those two together.
That's amazing. And like, I think we'll do like at the end of the podcast, where can all these companies find you so they can hire you and bring you in, because clearly all these companies need the work that you're doing. But I think one of the things you kind of mentioned in our pre-call was around the fact that what Black people experience outside of work has a direct impact on how they're able to show up to work. And obviously the work you're doing is meant to address that, but can you explain the problem statement around that and why it's important we need to be addressing that?
Yeah, definitely. So, we don't go to work in a vacuum, right? Like, we have lives outside of work, and experiences that we have outside of work can impact how we show up at work. And so let me give you an example. Last summer, I play violin, as I might have mentioned. And last summer, I went to a violin vigil in Aurora, Colorado. So the violin vigil was for a man named Elijah McClain. He was a 23-year-old Black man and violinist who used to play violin for the kittens at the rescue. Okay, just like the sweetest person. And as usual, there are videos, live footage now, thank God for technology in that regard, that show him getting murdered unarmed by the police. They choked him to death. They shot him with ketamine. And so to honor this beautiful man's life, a bunch of violinists and stringed instruments played in a park in Aurora. And you know what happened on that Saturday is the police came with their riot gear. And how threatening am I with the violin? And yet I am sprinting away from the police as they're shooting rubber bullets, as they have tear gas, and it's just complete chaos. And so, I was kind of shaken, as you might imagine, because I didn't go to any of the protests. I had experienced tear gas from police already. And so I was trying to avoid that. But when people were like, you need the violin, it's a violin vigil, it's not going to be dangerous. So totally shaken up by that. That's on a Saturday. Monday morning, 8 a.m., I have a work meeting with a white colleague, and I noticed myself snap at him. Like, I'm usually a pretty patient person, but I just snapped at this man, and I caught myself in the moment. This is part of the mindfulness practice of just being aware. And I said, "Oh, I'm really sorry, but I just have to tell you that this happened to me on Saturday, and I'm just not doing that well. So I'm not mad at you. I'm just a little shaken up." And so, it's hard to talk about these things. It's, I think now I'm much more open to just being vulnerable. But historically, I would have to hide all these things and just sweep it under the rug and pretend it didn't exist. But as you might imagine, one doesn't even realize how you're treating people and how you're acting, because you're just on defense, you're reactive, and you're suffering from things that happened outside of work. And I think employers really need to understand that Black people, their lives outside of the workplace and inside of the workplace, because a lot of these things happen at work as well, can be really challenging. And that's why mental health is so important. I used to think that therapy was for white people, for rich white people, okay? And it wasn't until many of my friends died and then the stress at work got too much that I just was like, wait, I think that I need to go to therapy. It was like, mercy, time out. I need to go to therapy. And then also mindfulness helped me out so much. And my companies, all the companies that I've worked for, they owe me thousands of dollars for my therapy bills, because a lot of the therapy sessions that I had were about things that happened at work.
Z, I just, we're going on a marathon kind of podcast today, because you have way too much information that is relevant, and I don't want to go from like one story to the next, but you also shared pre-call about this, this camping trip. Again, let's talk about like the therapy Do you mind sharing with our audience members like this camping trip gone awry?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was on a road trip driving from San Francisco to Colorado, and I was moving, and also I made it a national parks kind of vacation, right? Camping road trip with a friend of mine. And we got as far as Sacramento. So that's an hour and a half outside of San Francisco. And we went to a grocery store. Anybody from California might be familiar. It's called Rayleigh's, and it is a regional chain. And so I spent $220 at this grocery store because I'm camping, right? I was going to be off the grid. No stores need supplies. I even bought a cooler there. And so I'm in the parking lot trying to play Tetris with my trunk and pack up all the things, my stuff from moving, plus all the camping gear. When I hear sirens and a police SUV pulls up like skirt and with their sirens, and they said, ma'am, did you purchase those groceries? And I was like, yes. Hey, Grace, can you get the receipt? And then so I showed the receipt, showed the groceries, and then he goes to every single piece of all the groceries in my bag. And I'm like, what's this? I was like, that's an English cucumber. It's right here on the receipt. What's this? That's a portobello mushroom. I'm like, is this a vegetable education exercise? So as you might imagine, $220 of groceries, it was like a long time of this harassment. Then they went back inside. They said a cashier had called the police and said that I shoplifted. So as we're going through it and they're searching all of the bags in my car, my sleeping bags on the ground, like all the camping gear, the tent, my clothes, they're searching desperately. And I found out what they were looking for. They were looking for deli meat. Deli meat. Okay, I'm a vegan. I am a vegan. And so there was no deli meat to be found. There was one, my friend bought some soppressata sausage, and that was on the receipt. So there was one piece of deli meat, but there was no other deli meat because, as I mentioned to them, I was a vegan. Yet still, they harassed me for hours and hours and hours, insisting that there was meat somewhere in my car, even though I had a receipt. And so after this incident, I wrote an open letter to the CEO asking, do you have policies against racial profiling? And I asked them, what sort of training do they have for their employees? And then after this incident, the ACLU joined me in helping to negotiate. And I found out from a Black employee that worked there that there was a bet in the office that they were all laughing about what I was going to demand. Okay. This was a joke to them. Meanwhile, I'm like in tears, just a complete mess. And what I really wanted was required implicit bias training for all employees. And let me tell you, these negotiations, it was like, well, yes, we will train our executive team. And I'm like, do you know how far away your executive team are from the people that called the police on me? And so anyway, just a lot of like struggle. And this incident, the one thing that's crazy to me, I remember I had a boyfriend once, a white man, who said to me, oh no, this police brutality thing, like police harassment, that doesn't happen to Black people like you. And I think he was talking about, Black people that have gone to Harvard and people that are of certain education level. And, I don't have Harvard written on my forehead. When I'm on the grocery store, nobody knows that. I'm just a Black person. And so, yeah, the struggle is real.
I mean, it is. I don't know what to say sometimes, like, because I mean there's just countless stories and the behaviors, but at the end of the day, like, I think ultimately the power I feel from you and what our audience can take away from this conversation is that the to your point, that the Black team members in our organizations are, there's so much more going on, and if we don't create programs to support mental health, offer mental health programs that that aren't glossed over in white, and things like that, like there has to be a better way to support our Black colleagues because of everything that's going on in their lives that white people just have no clue. have no clue. And it's that to me is I mean, thankfully we're having more and more of these discussions, and thankfully a lot of leaders are starting to realize this. But we can't stop having these discussions. And you're right, that thank goodness for cell phone videos, right? Because otherwise, people would just the white people in this country would continue to bury their heads in the sand and ignore it because it doesn't affect them.
Well, and also, so like the violin vigil, the camping trip, like we're not talking, this was 20 years ago, right, Z?
Nope, the violin vigil, that was last summer. So that was 2020, the year of so many crazy things. And the grocery store, that was in 2018.
And that's what just still continues to like for me, I know, like I admittedly, like I try to stay away from mainstream media, just because, again, it's all the negative stuff, and I don't do it because I'm trying to bury my head in the sand. Like like the news really affects me viscerally. But again, as a blind person, like I don't know like the pound of pain from being black. I don't. But I felt the sting of discrimination, real life discrimination. So so again, like not even similar shoes, but I do that. But I'll never have a bigoted cop put their knee on my neck, like,
Well,
ever.
I mean, honestly, like this wasn't covered by mainstream news. So even if you were listening to mainstream news, you never would have heard this stuff. You have
Oh
to
my,
and actively
wow.
find all of this stuff on your own by engaging. Like I only hear about these types of things because I happen to be on Twitter and following the people who talk about this. If
So the
I,
violent vigil,
most people are not going to ever hear these stories.
that wasn't covered. So the violent vigil wasn't even covered on the news.
So the violin vigil, I mean, I think it might have been covered on like local news. What ended up happening actually is because of the violin vigil in Colorado, then there started to be violin vigils across the nation. And when it got to New York, then I think there was a New York Times article. But the
Wow.
police brutality on the violin vigil, not sure that was covered. You know what I mean? Like I think generally the news was like, look, violinists, and it was very it was beautiful, and the music really was beautiful. And actually what did end up happening is we ran away, we found a spot nearby, and then we started playing again to the backdrop of the sounds of police violence. It was just I cannot explain the duality there.
Yeah,
Oh
like
my
the story
God.
that would be reported, Mike, even if you like saw if there was a Denver Post article, is not the story you just heard. It would have been a
That
very
is
different story.
just, it's giving me goosebumps. See, I still appreciate your, really, I mean, talking about being vulnerable to share these, and you're doing it. And I understand because you intentionally sought out after, mental health techniques for yourself. And you even shared, like, you started your morning off with this. And so I know this isn't just it's not just a business for you. This is something for you to embrace because of your, what you've lived. And I so appreciate you sharing these real life recent events, and yet the power, the commitment that you have for your own mental well-being and the mental well-being of so many others. So I just can't thank you enough for everything that you've shared with me today personally.
And Z,
Yeah.
where can folks find you? Because obviously, companies need to be hiring you. Without a doubt,
Yes.
they need to be hiring you and bringing you in and doing this great work that you're doing. How can they find you?
Yeah, so my company is called Reclaiming Flow. So just www.reclaimingflow.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, so Reclaiming Flow. And I wanted to just share one last point because my company and what I offer has been a little bit controversial, depending on the maturity level of where companies are on their journey, because my classes are for Black people or for people of color. And let me tell you that for me, it has been so healing to do these practices around people that look like me. And so some companies, if they are earlier on their journey, will say, well, having a class just for Black people or just for people of color, that is racist because it's racist against the white people. So those are the folks that are earlier on their journey. And I just want to share that it's so critical for our healing to have safe spaces. And so what Reclaiming Flow offers is training specifically for marginalized communities so that they can heal.
So, Z, again, admittedly, I'm Caucasian, but I have a team full of blind and visually impaired people, and I want to I want to buy your services. Just again, I love what you're doing, and hopefully this doesn't sound patronizing or anything. I'm just touched with what you're doing. I love what you're doing. I can relate in a again a totally different universe, and I love what you're doing.
Yeah, Z, thank you so much for today. It's again, these are the conversations that need to be heard and to continue on over and over and over and over again, right? Until the change, we actually start to see change and see people's behaviors change. So thank you again for trusting us with your voice. Thank you, audience, for continuing to come back and check us out. As always, you can go to chooseinclusion.com to listen there, or get access to a bunch of different streaming sites that we're on. So thank you again, Z. Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Mike. Really, really appreciate it. Until next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.